All right, so in this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to get started on your robot and sort of give you a couple of tips and tricks as you start creating it. So I've got my background paper here for that I'm going to be building my relief sculpture on. I've got some pretty decent heavyish duty scissors that will cut through my thicker cardboard fairly well, and it'll cut through the thinner cardboard even better. Okay, I've got some glue, a little bit of glue left over here, and I've got some markers. I've got a couple of different markers as well as a Sharpie, and I'll sort of show you that here a little bit later. But to sort of get us started, and remember you have to have those at least 6 layers. So that's at least 6 layers coming out from the base. Okay, so, and again, some of you have a little bit thicker cardboard or thinner cardboard. This just came from an Amazon box, so this works out pretty well in order to be cutting. If you're cutting more than kind of like this much of a length, you're going to have to sort of cut through it and then move it through and then cut again. It's not necessarily going to just normally sort of cut all the way through. So before you even get started cutting, you've got to draw out your shapes again. So if I had a body shape that maybe it was an ovoid, I'll bring it over here. I'll draw my ovoid here. Okay, and you should all be not drawing as dark as I am. Make sure you're drawing lightly so that it's easy to erase the little spots if you have a little bit of bleed over with your pencil. But I'm making mine dark so that you can see. And again, I started on the edge here, so maximize the usage of your materials. So if you're doing a shape, don't do it right in the center of your piece of cardboard or whatever center of whatever you're working with. Go off to the side. You know, I could have even gone this more in the corner because it makes it a little easier to cut off your pieces. And again, as I use my scissors, I'm kind of constantly just cutting here near the back. I'm not going all the way to the tip. And in this case, I'm just sort of rotating. Now, as I get to here, this is getting a little bit harder, so I'm just going to make a straight cut. And then I'll come in, and I'm cutting again back into here, and sort of rotating kind of around. And again, you may be like, hey, Mr. Davis, I already know how to cut with scissors. You know, that's fine, but just trying to give you a couple tips and tricks to make it a little bit easier on yourself. All right, now I might want to just have my body, just start out and glue my body. So you might want to have all of your pieces out. I would kind of encourage you to do that so you have everything cut out and ready to go. Then you can figure out, well, do I want this down first, and then maybe I have some arms. So maybe I have some kind of robot-like arms. And maybe those arms will kind of come off kind of this way. So that's sort of 2 layers, right? Okay, or however I want my arms, or maybe I've got lots of joints, and so I would cut this and maybe move this again. Maybe they're going to be sort of underneath. So you're going to have some things underneath. So this is raised a little bit more. Okay. So you kind of have to figure things out. So again, I recommend cutting everything out first, then planning where you want everything to go, because then you can kind of pose your robot how you had it posed in your original drawing. In class that I would always say, cut a few out, then glue them right there. That way we wouldn't lose the pieces, because there was always a chance of that when you have, two different class periods of kids, 30 kids each, zipping around, having various things cut out. Things tend to get lost a little bit. Okay, so I think I'm going to have it there. So when you apply your glue, all right, put it on there, and I'm just doing a little bead with a little bit around the outside, and then I'll go ahead and attach it to my base. Okay, and that's not a lot of glue. That's going to dry a lot faster than if I squirted a hole on there. And again, you're getting a 4-ounce bottle. All right, so your 4-ounce bottle, that's all you're going to get. And I've got mine sort of upside down because I have a little teeny bit left in my glue bottle. I want to make sure I keep that near the end. So I'm going to glue these to here. Now, this is where your tape could come in very handy, your masking tape. So let's say I'm going to be attempting this, and it might stay on there and it might not. There we go. Okay. So if I go ahead and start putting an arm there, okay, this may stay because this is fairly lightweight, so it might sort of stick there. This might be a little bit thicker, and so it might be heavier, or this could be further up on the top, so it's further away from the paper, and it has kind of more to go before it, it goes all the way down, and so this might tend to bend. So you could actually take a little piece of tape and put a little piece of tape between here, masking tape, and then when it's all dried and done, you can just peel the tape off and throw the tape away. But I think mine's sort of staying there. And a lot of times I tell kids, well, you may have to hold and blow on it until it starts to really sort of firm up. Okay, so I've got one arm on there. Okay, so maybe I'll have some other things on there. Maybe I'll put my head next. Maybe my head is sort of parallel with this or sort of flush against the paper. Maybe the head is sort of up. Now, what if I want, there's some other things that I could do. So let's say I could start creating some depth on my body. Perhaps it's kind of an ovoid. Maybe I want to have another one here, and I could have a smaller one inside that, or maybe this one could even be bigger, and I could have a little bit smaller ovoid and a smaller one sort of going on up to give myself some depth. So if I did this sort of in a short way, I could have, get those out of there. Okay, I can continue, almost starts looking a little bit like an avocado, to where I can continue to have sort of layers sort of building up like that. So that's one way you can do it, where your shape is just slightly smaller than the first shape, glue it on there, a little bit smaller, glue it on there, and so on. So it becomes this sort of almost this rounded form that kind of comes out towards you because your eye wants to fill in the space between this edge and this edge, sort of coming up over that way. So that's one way you can start figuring out how to get some depth, because right there, that's 3 layers. So I'm halfway there, and again, to the minimum of 6. Minimum of 6. If you want those above and beyond points, you've got to go past 6. So like 7, 8, 9 layers. All right. Now, if you have, maybe I'll go ahead and glue these down. So if you have thicker cardboard, because some of you have a little bit thicker cardboard, and if you have, so maybe my head's down there, and if you have some things on your robot that are going to be kind of really hard to cut out, like some really sort of fine details or some really thin limbs or something, whoops, it may not work to try to cut out. Like, for example, if you have, let's say you have like a clamp or something on here. Now, trying to cut this out with these, this is pretty thin in here. This is probably okay. Like, my arms that I made are about that thick, that wide, and so they were cut out pretty well. But this in here, my chances of me getting in there and sort of not having this break are going to be sort of a little bit on the low side. So what I can do is I can take my thinner cardboard, okay, and if I have the same kind of thing, grabber there. Now that's a little bit thicker, but still. But because this is thinner, it is going to be easier to cut out. And a lot of times you can just kind of cut, and I like to sort of cut areas off. Like, for example, this might be hard to get around, so I might actually take this and cut like that straight off, and then kind of cut this again. And then I could go ahead and I could cut out this inside part. And I'm just going to do that in chunks. So I'm just going to take out that little part, and then I could go ahead and go inside here. Okay, and because this is fairly thin, it's a lot easier than if I tried to do it with the thick stuff. Okay. All right, that turned out pretty good. I could go back in there and get that a little bit closer if I wanted to. Okay, now this is pretty rigid enough to still have out like this. Okay, but let's say you had, maybe you had something that was even thinner than this. Maybe you had, you know, really thin, I'm not even sure, maybe some kind of wire or antenna. That sounds like pretty old school technology, but maybe I had something that was really thin coming off my robot. Okay, so again, that works pretty well. Cutting that out, you know, maybe I want it like this, or maybe it's even shorter. Okay, and I say, all right, well, I want this sort of a lot higher. Okay, there's various things that I could do to do that, where you can start building up height, but maybe you don't want necessarily to, you know, have this like super thick. Maybe you want this to float. So I could have a thing that floats. So I could take a little piece and make like a little rectangle out of it or something, you know. And if I had, let's say I had a larger, let's say I had like a little another rectangle over here. So I'm going to cut out another body part. Okay, but let's say I wanted that kind of like floating like up. You know, so I could actually like sort of take this, maybe it's attached to here, and I could have this come up, and this is actually 2 layers right here, but it doesn't have the full thing down near the bottom. All right, so this is sort of popping up. So maybe you want to have something sort of floating way out here, and then you can actually attach things sort of underneath. Okay, and of course when you do that, you'll sort of want to do it in reverse, where you take maybe a couple of layers and you glue them, blow on them until they're dry, or set them over, you know, on somewhere for later, and then come in as it's a lot taller and then glue it down. Okay, so for example, in this way, if I wanted this underneath, I would kind of glue up my depth on here, so I have my other layers. Maybe I've got like some smaller layers here. So I've got all this glued together. So that's going to be how tall that is. That's already 1, 2, 3. That's already 3 high. And then I'll glue this on. Okay, and when this whole thing is done, then I would turn it over and I would glue it down that way. Okay, you know, or I could have this built up quite a few layers, like that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and I could have like another layer out there, so I could have something that would be that high there. Okay, so there's a number of ways to get depth, and again, 6 is the minimum, right? You're not going to get, still not going to get all those 50 points in that one column if all you've got is 6. All right. So now again, this is an accurate representation of your initial drawing. All right. And again, if you don't have as thin a cardboard as I have, I know some people I gave pretty thick stuff to. You know, you'll definitely want to find, you know, some other containers. You know, again, find a cereal box, find a cracker box. You know, cut it up and use that stuff. And again, any cardboard that you don't use, like this stuff here, I'm not going to get rid of this. I'm going to save this for another project. So anything like little scraps like this we can recycle, but you know, definitely we're saving like every single thing we can, because the more we save, the more things we can build sort of later on in class. Now, in terms of when you actually start adding color to these, like I've got my Sharpie here for my last little lines, because I've got, you know, nice, it'll make nice circuitry lines or whatever I have on there in terms of the details. I mean, if you have one, great. If you wanted to go buy one, that's fine too. You know, you don't have to, but they're pretty handy. I just didn't quite have enough in terms of my supplies to give to everybody. I need to give them to my Art 1 and my Art 2 kids. Okay, so markers will work best when you start adding color to your robots. One of the things you have to be careful of, and I'm just showing you on my paper, but you're not going to actually do any drawing or necessarily any coloring on your paper. But when you use markers, it's basically a brush tool, a paint tool. So here's my brush tip. My ink is already going into it kind of automatically. And as it flows, I'm just going to sort of pull, making nice, just overlapping them just a little bit. So I get this nice solid, and as you get better, you can just barely overlap it. So this is like a nice solid green, as opposed to this, which, like, what happened? Well, this marker is older. I've had it for a while in my house, but because I just did a steady pull, the gravity is sort of, pulling the ink out of the tip of the marker. And so, you have this nice even flow, whereas back and forth, you're just using one little area over and over again. It's dry, and it takes too long to get that because you're back over. It's not a pressure tool. We don't go back over it like this. So the same thing will work on our cardboard. Okay, so I can come in here, and it is going to be a little bit different in color because of the fact that this is, sort of cardboard. So it starts out with that brown cardboard color. Okay, and I have to kind of be careful. Now I'm going to go around these things. And you could even, if you really wanted to plan stuff out, you could have everything cut out and you could color, like I could color this arm first and have everything built and then glue it all together. Okay, the only thing with that you just have to watch out for is when this has a marker on it. If you put glue, it's going to sort of reactivate the marker a little bit, and it's going to get the color kind of onto your hands, and it may also come off of your pieces. Okay, so again, just kind of lines like that. You got to be a little careful over here. And again, the final touches come into play, with our line tools. I mean, I could even go back over it with a pencil. I can get line that way. Marker is great because it's nice and dark. And I could do some kind of like whatever kind of little details. Maybe I've got lines that go in and it's some kind of circuit happening over here. Okay, so again, minimum of 6 layers. You're going to need at least 5 of the different colors, just like in your drawing. And these things will end up being larger than your hand. Like if that's my body, maybe I'm going to have my other parts, my upper and my lower limbs. By the time I'm done, it will be about hand sized. And that's hopefully to help you get going.